It's December 18, 2022, and a Boeing 777 from United Airlines has just departed into the stormy skies above Maui. At first, everything appears routine as the Boeing climbs steadily, but then things start to go wrong. The captain notices something is off when the airspeed increases faster than expected. As he tries to figure out the cause, he momentarily loses focus on the flight directors, missing the fact that the aircraft is beginning to climb less steeply. By the time he realizes what's wrong, it's already too late. The aircraft suddenly enters a steep dive just 2,100 feet above the ocean. The ground proximity warning system sounds its alarm. The crew is now in a race against time to regain control and avert disaster as the ocean rapidly approaches. Will the pilots manage to pull out of this dive in time? This is the story of United Airlines Flight 1722. Just as piecing together the story of a flight can be challenging, tracing your own family history can also be a complex journey. That's why I've partnered with MyHeritage. MyHeritage is an incredible tool that makes researching your family history easier than ever. With access to over 20 billion historical documents, MyHeritage allows you to explore your roots and discover long-lost relatives. One of the features I love is their Instant Discoveries tool. It allowed me to add entire branches to my family tree with just one click. Using this feature, I was able to trace my family back 4 generations. This is my great-great-grandfather, born in 1855. He worked in construction in a little town called Mas Louise here in the Netherlands. He married in 1884, and 8 years later, he became the proud father of my great-grandfather, Daniel. Through MyHeritage, I uncovered this story, but I also reconnected with distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in a long time. What really touched me was finding an old photograph of my great-great-grandfather through MyHeritage's extensive records. Seeing his face for the first time felt like I was meeting him in a way. What's even better is that I could enhance the photo using one of MyHeritage tools, bringing my family's history to life in a way I never thought possible. If you've ever been curious about your family's past, MyHeritage is the perfect place to start. Sign up for a 14-day free trial and enjoy all the amazing features MyHeritage has to offer. On the afternoon of December 18th, United Airlines Flight 1722, a Boeing 777-200, was set to depart. The flight was scheduled to depart from Kahului Airport and fly across the Pacific Ocean, heading northeast toward the U.S. mainland, with San Francisco International Airport as its destination. The route covered a distance of approximately 2,400 miles, with an estimated flight time of around 5 hours. The weather in the region was far from ideal, with heavy rain reducing visibility. To make things worse, there were warnings about low-level wind shear. Despite these challenging conditions, United Flight 1722, carrying 281 passengers and crew, was scheduled to depart on time. The captain for the flight was a 55-year-old experienced pilot who had logged over 19,600 flight hours, of which 5,000 were on the Boeing 777, with 300 as pilot in command. For this flight, he was the pilot flying. The first officer, who had previously worked at Hawaiian Airlines, had around 5,300 flight hours. However, he had only 120 hours on the Boeing 777, making him relatively new to both the aircraft and United Airlines. For this flight, he was the pilot monitoring. The pilots arrived as the aircraft was being prepared for departure. The captain first spoke with the purser, who reported that the earlier descent and arrival into Maui had been turbulent. Meanwhile, the first officer conducted the pre-flight walk-around. The captain briefed the purser on the specifics of the upcoming flight. He told her about the flight details and highlighted that the flight attendants should stay seated during the climb because of the bad weather. As the first officer finished his walk-around, he received a text message from a friend. Just hours earlier, Hawaiian Airlines Flight 35, an Airbus A330 traveling from Phoenix to Honolulu, had encountered severe turbulence during its final approach. The turbulence was so extreme that 36 people required medical attention, including 11 with serious injuries. Among the injured were a 1-year-old child and 3 crew members. This incident showed just how unpredictable the air currents around the Hawaiian Islands were and highlighted the importance of staying alert in such dangerous conditions. Concerned, the first officer quickly texted back to thank his friend for the update, then turned off his phone before entering the cockpit. He immediately shared the information with the captain, ensuring they were aware of the potential for turbulence during their own flight. As the 271 passengers began boarding, the pilots carried out the performance calculations. The Automatic Terminal Information Service, ATIS, a continuous radio broadcast providing pilots with up-to-date airport information, was unavailable at the time. This meant the necessary information had to be obtained by contacting the tower. Runway 20 was being used for outgoing flights, and the tower informed them that the winds were reasonably light, coming from a southerly direction at around 10 knots. For the performance calculations, the pilots consulted Sabre, an advanced computer system designed to calculate the optimal settings for takeoff and climb, including flap positions and engine power. The system recommended using flaps 20 and D-rated thrust for departure. Typically, a Boeing 777 takes off with flaps 15. However, the unique demands of this situation, such as the short runway and the wind conditions, required a flaps 20 setting, which is less commonly used for takeoff. The first officer was relatively new to the Boeing 777, and taking off with flaps May 20th have been unfamiliar to him. After completing all pre-flight checks in the cockpit, the pilots contacted Maui Tower to request clearance for pushback and engine start. At approximately 2:30 p.m. local time, the aircraft began its pushback. During this time, the crew was informed that the active runway had changed to runway 02. With the pushback completed and the engine started, the captain and first officer reassessed the weather conditions and adjusted their takeoff configuration for runway 02. They decided to set the flaps to 20 degrees with maximum thrust for takeoff, marking a change from their original plan of using reduced thrust. This decision was prompted by reports from other pilots of significant low-level wind shear, highlighting the need for a powerful takeoff to ensure a safe climb out of Kahului. After a short taxi, they reached the holding point and were cleared to line up and wait for takeoff clearance. At 2:49 p.m., the crew received clearance for takeoff. With full takeoff thrust applied, the Boeing 777 accelerated down the runway. The rotation and initial climb proceeded normally, with the first officer retracting the landing gear. However, they soon encountered rapid airspeed fluctuations, with light turbulence intensifying as they climbed. As the aircraft reached the thrust reduction and acceleration altitude, the captain adjusted the pitch slightly to increase speed and called for flaps 5. Yet in the moment's stress, the first officer misheard the command and set flaps 15 instead. This small mistake would soon lead to a series of events that put the flight at risk. After selecting flaps 15, the first officer checked in with Honolulu Control as the aircraft climbed through 1,400 feet and entered instrument meteorological conditions. They responded with instructions to climb to 16,000 feet. They also advised that moderate to extreme weather conditions were present in all directions and approved any necessary weather deviations. At first, everything seemed normal. The aircraft climbed steadily, and the crew focused on their tasks. But then the captain noticed something unusual. The airspeed was increasing more rapidly than expected, and the maximum operating speed indicator began to move to a lower value than anticipated. Concerned about a possible overspeed condition, the captain immediately reduced engine thrust by overriding the auto throttle. This adjustment caused the engines to decelerate slightly, resulting in a slight downward pitch momentum, which caused the aircraft to pitch forward slightly, though it continued to climb. The captain's attention now turned to what was happening with the flaps. In his mind, flaps 5 should have been selected as he had called for them, but since that was not happening, he began to anticipate some kind of flap malfunction. He started checking the engine indicating and crew alerting system to see if any emergency procedures needed to be followed, but there were no alerts and no chimes had been heard, indicating that it couldn't be a flap malfunction. Seconds later, the captain realized what was wrong. The flaps were set to 15, not to 5. He called for flaps 5 again twice and then looked at the first officer to ensure he was selecting the correct flap setting. But by then, the situation had already escalated. The aircraft's pitch was decreasing, and the airspeed continued to rise. The first officer, noticing the rapid increase in airspeed and the changing pitch, asked the captain about the situation but received no immediate response. Instead, the captain, likely still concerned and focused on the impending flap overspeed condition, asked for flaps 1. The first officer thought it was strange that the captain was pitching forward in response to a high-speed event. However, because of the moderate turbulence, he was unsure if the captain was actually reacting to handling difficulties, wind shear, or if they might even have some sort of instrumentation problem. While the captain was focusing on the flap settings, he failed to notice that the downward pitch motion of the nose had continued. The Boeing 777, no longer correctly configured for its speed and altitude, began to descend rapidly. The descent rate increased to over 8,600 feet per minute, a dangerous rate in any situation, but especially just after takeoff and having barely gained altitude. The Ground Proximity Warning System, a critical safety system designed to prevent controlled flight into terrain, began issuing its warnings. The system blared over and over. The first officer, recognizing the imminent danger, called out the warnings. Now fully understanding the situation, the captain knew he had to act fast to prevent a disaster. Inside the cabin, the passengers were unaware of the technical issues unfolding in the cockpit. They only knew that something was wrong. The aircraft suddenly dropped, and many were thrown against their seat belts. Panic began to spread as the aircraft continued its descent. In the cockpit, the captain acted fast. As they broke through the clouds and found themselves face to face with the ocean, death stared them in the eyes. The captain pulled back on the control column, initially reducing the thrust slightly, likely to avoid a flap over speed they were still dealing with, but quickly added maximum thrust as part of their controlled flight into terrain escape maneuver. He fought to bring the aircraft back under control. The descent finally stopped at just 748 feet above the ocean surface. The Boeing 777 began to climb again, with the aircraft now pitched up to 23 degrees nose up, reaching a maximum climb rate of 8,680 feet per minute. The warnings stopped, and the immediate crisis was over. But the experience left the crew and passengers deeply shaken. Among the passengers were individuals who later recounted the terrifying moments when the aircraft dove toward the ocean. One passenger described seeing nothing but water filling the window, convinced they were about to crash. The screams and panic in the cabin were overwhelming. It wasn't until the captain made an announcement reassuring everyone that everything was okay again that a sense of calm slowly returned. From the moment the captain looked away from his primary flight display to investigate the flap issue until the aircraft reached the lowest point of its nosedive, just 748 feet above the ocean, only about 10 seconds had passed. During those few critical seconds, the Boeing 777, which had initially climbed to around 2,100 feet, saw its descent rate accelerate to over 8,600 feet per minute, bringing the aircraft dangerously close to disaster. Had the crew reacted just a few seconds later, they would likely have crashed into the water. Once the aircraft was on a stable climb, the captain contacted the purser to check the condition of the passengers, crew, and the aircraft. The purser confirmed that everyone was okay and that there was no internal damage. With no injuries reported among passengers or crew and no signs of structural damage, the captain decided to continue the flight to San Francisco. Upon landing in San Francisco, the incident was initially not reported as there was no damage or injuries. However, the NTSB learned of the event 2 months later and opened an investigation. Unfortunately, by the time the investigation began, the cockpit voice and flight data recorders had been overwritten, which limited the available data. Despite this limitation, the NTSB's investigation revealed several critical factors that contributed to the incident. The primary cause was the miscommunication between the captain and the first officer regarding the flap setting during the initial climb. This miscommunication, combined with the severe weather conditions and the captain's manual control inputs, led to the dangerous descent. In response to the incident, United Airlines immediately took steps to prevent it from happening again. The airline revised its training modules to emphasize the importance of clear communication in the cockpit, especially during critical phases of flight. They also launched an awareness campaign at their training center, focusing on flight path management and adhering to standard operating procedures. Thanks to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video. Sign up for a 14-day free trial and enjoy all the amazing features MyHeritage has to offer. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my video. Thanks for watching my video.